Hi everyone, it's Rue from the King's Roost. Today I'm going to teach you how to make cold processed soap. This is a very basic formula. It's very straightforward. It's the formula that I use. There's lots of recipes and formulas out there, lots of different things you can do. You can experiment later, but for now I'm just going to give you this very basic recipe. In this video I'm going to go over all the ingredients, the exact formula, as well as some very, very important safety procedures that you need to follow. So first, let's go over the equipment you'll need. So here we have coconut oil and olive oil. They're both organic. I like to use organic oils in my soaps. Over here I have lye, which is sodium hydroxide. Pretty dangerous stuff when you start mixing it with water, and actually this is in a dangerous form right now too, which is why I'm wearing gloves. That's the other part of the equipment. You've got a stick blender, some fragrances, a pot to mix everything in, and a mold that's going to allow the soap to set, and we're going to pour it into that later. And of course I've got my eye protection, long sleeves, gloves, long pants. Once you start mixing up the lye, it's a very, very caustic substance. It's really going to hurt you if you get it. If you get it in your eyes, you could go blind. If you get it on your skin, it's going to burn. So make sure that whenever you're dealing with lye, you absolutely keep yourself very well protected. 1,680 grams of olive oil, 683 grams of coconut oil, and 337 grams of lye. It's extremely important that those ratios of lye to oil are exactly correct to the gram. Don't mess with them at all, and you need to mix the water and the lye together. The way you do that, and this is one of the most important things you need to remember about soap making, aside from the safety, is that the lye gets added to the water. If you add water to the lye, it's a very, very, very strong alkali. And when you add the water to the lye, it's going to explode. It's going to boil over. So you do not want to do that. In fact, you may have noticed that in this water, I've put ice. That will actually keep the whole reaction kind of cool. If you just put lye directly into the water and it's room temperature water, the lye is going to heat up. The lye solution is going to heat up, and you're going to have to wait for it to cool down in order to use it. So to speed up this whole process, because I don't have time to wait for that, I'm going to put the lye into ice water and stir it up. So that's going to be the first step. Make sure you're in a well-ventilated area, because it does create a few fumes. And here we go. Stir it nice and gently. Make sure you use a non-reactive metal like a stainless steel spoon.
Anything you shouldn't use? Don't use wood, don't use...
Yeah. Don't use a wood spoon or anything like that for this. You want to use non-reactive materials when you're working with lye. Your lye will eventually, in the long term, dissolve your wooden spoon. Plus, you wouldn't want to use that wooden spoon for food and for cooking afterwards. Generally speaking, anytime you use these types of chemicals, you don't want to use your containers for regular food afterwards. So this is going to take a minute or two. What you'll notice is that the ice is already melted. The heat generated by the reaction has already melted that entire pile of ice. The next step is to mix your lye and your oil. So I'm going to go pour this over into my larger pot, because you definitely want to have a little bit of extra space. So we're going to put the oil into the pot. You want to get all the oil out, but for the sake of recording this today, I actually put a couple extra grams of oil into this pot so we don't have to get every last little bit out. Next, we're going to add the lye very carefully and very slowly. You do not want any splashing. I used ice to keep the temperature down. If you don't use ice, you're going to have to wait for the lye to cool down, and you want the lye and oil mixture to be mixed together at a similar temperature, somewhere in the range of 100 to 130 degrees, and that's a really good safe range for the temperatures. Okay, so now we're ready to mix it up. I'm using a stick blender that you will not use for food, of course, because you're mixing oils and lye. And what I do is I put it in at a very sharp angle, and I want to shake out all the bubbles. You do not want to froth up your soap, you just want to blend it gently. So I start on the lower setting, the 1, place it right on the bottom, and mix it nice and carefully. Don't lift it out, or else you're going to spray soap and oil and lye all over the room. So this is going to make some noise. As you can see, the oils and the lye have now mixed, but they haven't completed any kind of reaction yet. They're working on it. So I'm going to keep mixing it. It's going to take a few minutes until it starts to thicken up and you achieve something called trace, which is, trace means when you dribble it in, it leaves a line. And that has not happened yet because we're right at the beginning of the process. So again, I'm going to shake the bubbles out and we'll mix it up for another minute or so. What's happening right now is the oils are beginning to react with the lye, and soap is beginning to form. The saponification process is beginning. And what's going to happen is, within a few minutes, it's going to thicken up, and that's going to be the time that we put our fragrance oils in, any essential oils that you want to put in for flavoring your soaps, and then we're going to pour it into the mold. While I'm mixing the soap up here, I wanted to mention a few things about the mold in terms of preparation. The recipe that I gave you is for a 7.5 pound bar of soap. That is a mold here that I made out of balsa wood, and it fits perfectly for a mold this size. The dimensions of this, if you want to make one, it's 2 feet long, 4 inches wide, 3 inches tall. And that recipe fills this up just the right amount. If you want to cut the recipe in half and use a mold half the size, that's perfectly fine. Now, one thing that's really important is if you're using a wooden mold, you need to line it with parchment paper or freezer paper or some kind of liner. Otherwise, you'll never get your soap out of the mold. So I've cut a couple pieces of parchment paper, lined one on the end here, a little bit to cover the edges, and then just one huge piece on the inside. A lot of people like to just cut it out of one single piece. However you want to do it, just make sure you get a nice, good nice, good setting of the paper inside the mold. And in fact, this one might look a little strange, but it's because I've used this particular piece of parchment paper for the last 2 or 3 batches. I reused them because it fits nicely inside the mold. All right, I'm going to go back to mixing for a couple more minutes until we achieve trace. Okay, so I've been mixing for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, if that. And when I dribble, you see that's called trace. Oh, look, we got it. We have trace. So this is the time. You see, trace is basically you're tracing the pattern, leaving a trace of soap on the surface, and it doesn't sink right in. So that's just the right thickness. Now it's time to mix in our fragrant oils. I've got vanilla oil, which I'm going to put in, and I'm not going to give you in this case, it's about 2 tablespoons, 2 or 3 tablespoons of vanilla, and I'm going to put about a tablespoon of sandalwood oil. Mix the two together. For most fragrances, you need about a tablespoon per pound, so you need about 7 tablespoons, but depending on which oils you use, some are stronger than others. And that's something also that's a bit of a personal preference. And now I'm going to mix that in. And it's ready to go into the mold. Okay, so it's a little hard to pour out of my big pot here, and it's kind of heavy. So I start off by ladling the first soap into the mold here, and it takes a minute or two, and then when it gets down to a nice manageable amount, I then tend to just dump it in. I've ladled most of it in, and I'm just going to pour the rest in. Let's get all the last little bits out, get as much as I can. Once again, all the equipment that you use, you want to set aside for soap making and not used for food. So this is an extra ladle that we have. I only use it for soap making. So there we have it. The soap is in the mold. I'm going to give it a little wiggle to get it to settle. And next step is to cover it and let it set overnight. Okay, so here we are. It's ready to be prepped for its overnight set. I'm going to cover it in plastic. A little bit of plastic wrap here. Don't worry if the plastic wrap touches a little bit, it's not a big deal. This just keeps the soap from getting on the towel because you want to insulate it. You put a towel on it. Now I'm going to set it out overnight to set and harden for 24 hours. Okay, so it's been 24 hours. This is one of my favorite parts. I'm going to open this up and see how it looks. Okay, well, it's definitely hard. Take the plastic off, and let's get this thing out and cut it. All right. You have to tap the mold, sometimes it gets a little sticky. Look at that. I love it. Okay, so I don't want to get any soap on my table, so what I usually do is I'm going to get rid of the parchment paper here, and I'm going to cut it directly on the mold. You can cut it using a couple of different tools. You can use a regular knife, you can use dough splitters, and I have a crinkle cutter here, and I have a straight cutter here. The other thing you want to do is you want to have pretty consistent thicknesses of your soap. So I use a ruler just as a reference, but after a while you'll get used to cutting it in about 1-inch segments. So here we go. There's a nice straight cut. I'm going to give you a sample of about a 1-inch cut that's also a crinkle cut, and you'll see what that looks like. And I actually do most of my soap this way. And I'm used to eyeballing the 1 inch. You can also mark the bottom of your mold in 1-inch increments if you want and use it as a guide, and that way you do it once and you never have to worry about measuring it again. Once you finish cutting your soap, the one really important step is the curing process. You need to leave your soap out to dry and to cure for 4 to 6 weeks. There are 2 really important reasons for this. One, if you use it too soon, it hasn't had a chance to harden and it's going to just turn into a pile of goo in your shower. It's going to melt, it's not going to last, and that's a total bummer. The other important reason is that if you have any unreacted lye, it gives the lye a chance to finish reacting with any leftover oils and make sure that you won't have any, your soap won't be irritating. So you put your soap on paper towels, give it a little bit of space, and then put it up in a cool, dry place out of reach of kids and animals, and you can even turn it once in a while, flip them over to make sure the moisture is able to get out of the soap. Okay, it's been 6 weeks. The soap is cured. The house has been smelling great. Now, if you're going to be giving your soap as a gift or putting it into your guest bathroom, you want it to look really nice and you want to have a nice presentation. One of the things we do is we put a label on it. We take a regular old piece of paper, printer paper, print it out, cut it down to about 3 inches by 7 inches. Keep in mind, don't get too enthusiastic and do it too early. Do it after the soap is cured, because if you do it beforehand, the soap does shrink a little when it cures and it won't fit properly anymore. So I'm going to show you how to put a label on here. It's pretty straightforward. I'm going to put a couple of creases here, one right at the bottom of the label. It also helps to know, for reference later on, what kind of soap it is. Sometimes I lose track of the soaps that I've been making and what flavor is what. Okay, so let's find the spot for the next crease there, but a nice clean crease. Flip it over. Use a regular old glue stick. Put it on nice and tight, straighten it nicely. There you have nicely wrapped bar of soap that's ready to give as a gift.